Hello, BookTube. My name is Nathan, and today I am talking about Locke and Key, the first volume, Welcome to Lovecraft. This is written by Joe Hill, and the artwork is done by Gabriel Rodriguez. This was first published in 2008 by IDW Publishing. It's a horror comic book series or graphic novels, and this is the first volume in it. There's, I believe, 6 altogether in the standard collection. And so I'll get into the plot itself. A pretty quick summary. Basically, you have got a family who you're coming into the story in the aftermath of them surviving this home invasion of a couple of deranged late teens, early 20-somethings who come into their home, and basically you've got 3 kids and then husband and wife, the mother and father of these kids, and the father, he ends up getting killed. So one of the invaders who does this was a deranged former student of his. He was a guidance counselor, and for reasons that become apparent as you read, this all kind of connects back to the childhood home of the father. And so the family, they've moved out of their home. They go back east to Lovecraft, to the town of Lovecraft, and then they start living in the home of the deceased father, the one where he grew up. And the kids are all dealing with grief. The mother, she's dealing with grief. And so it's very overt, the agony that they're going through, the emotional and psychological agony of trying to survive this, trying to survive an event like that, and then move into a new town. And I mean, moving into a new town is difficult enough if you're a teenager, and then to do this for the reasons that they have to do it for, obviously would be so much more difficult. And I think that gets explored really, really well here. There's other stuff going on to the property that they move into. It is not exactly a standard traditional house. That there is this is not really giving anything away in terms of spoilers, but there is a spirit who's there who really starts having this interaction with the youngest, who's still quite young, Bode, where she starts having this interaction with him. And so there's other parts as well to the house beyond having a spirit. So there's a lot of supernatural, otherworldly stuff. The back cover calls it dark fantasy, right? And so you get a lot of that. You're not dealing with something that's grounded in reality, but there is stuff that's supernatural that's going on within this. As far as what I really, really like, and in general, I really enjoyed this. What I really like is the narrative complexity. And I don't just mean that in terms of the writing, but even within the artwork, because I think I know that that's something that often gets overlooked in a critical discussion about comics in general, is there can be too much of an emphasis on the writing itself, and then the idea being that the artwork exists just to try to illustrate a little bit more of what the writing is doing. But the comics as a medium got a unique language, just like film as a medium has got a unique language. Within film, when you have something like a shot, reverse shot, and then back to the shot, when you've got the interaction between characters, that's doing something that you don't really see within other narrative forms. And likewise in comics, you've got some unique features in this that are really found within the artwork. As in, if you tried to adapt this into a novel rather than a comic, you would miss a lot of that. And that's what I think is really great about this, is that there actually is a fair bit of complexity to the artwork. And so, for instance, I mean, this is just one part of it, but you've got the oldest boy, Tyler, then he's really going through hell as a result of losing his father. And because it was violent, because he was there and he violently stopped one of the kids who had broken in, you see him and he's watching the news, and you can see that it's one horrible, violent story after another on the news. And it's the way the artwork is done, like it doesn't, there's nothing in the text that says, 5 minutes later or 2 minutes later on the news. It expects that you are paying close enough attention to understand that we're jumping in time here. That's one thing that's being done at in terms of the level of the art. The other thing that's done is there's a lot of visuals that show reflections, and so they're often looking in like a pond that they have on the property, or at the edge, at the bay of the ocean where the town of Lovecraft is located, and you get a lot of them staring into this, or staring into puddles and seeing their reflection, and their reflection, especially for Tyler, is going back to the home invasion, and it's going back to what he was wearing then. And so if you're looking at it, then you have to really pay close attention to the artwork. You can't just assume that the artwork is telling you, is showing you a visual of what the text is saying. And this is a very succinct way of showing PTSD. It's a really good succinct way to show that in Tyler's head, he's in Lovecraft, but he's not in Lovecraft right now. He's back at the scene of the crime. He's back in his old life. And no matter what he does, he can't get away from that when he sees himself, he doesn't see who we actually see, or other people in the town of Lovecraft see. Instead, for him, he is still there. He's still trapped in the house where all this violence occurred. And so you've also got this whole subplot of the youngest, Bode, who discovers a key in this house where he opens a door, and it's suggested that other doors in the house do other things, but basically he goes through this door and then he becomes a ghost, where his spirit leaves his physical body. As a result of this, he's able to kind of like move around and observe different things. And on the surface, then you can say like, well, that's a spoiler for the plot, but it's like, that's not just a plot element. There's something else going on there. And I mean, for the youngest, in order to escape his own grief, he literally is escaping from his own body. And that's ultimately what it plays an important role in the story later on. But this idea of, you can imagine that for Tyler, he would love to be able to do this. And Bode, his younger brother, is trying to tell him, hey, you can do this, like you can participate in this. And of course, Tyler is too old to believe in silly stories like this, and he thinks that his younger brother is speaking on a metaphorical or an imaginative level about this, but he's not. And so for Tyler, he's trying to escape himself, but he can't quite get there. And Bode is able to do this, and I think that that's significant. I think that children do bounce back from disaster and tragedy much more quickly, typically, than teenagers and adults. And I think that conveys it in a really succinct way. Like, just seeing him, just boom, I'm outside of my body and I'm something else, and I'm able to get away from my corporeal being and to be something else, to kind of get away from the weight of all of this. So there's that. And it does jump around in terms of the plot itself, where you get flashbacks to the event, the home invasion, and then you come back into the present with them being in Lovecraft, and you've got multiple characters, and you're really jumping around a fair bit. And so you have to be paying attention, which I like. I really enjoy that about the comic itself. You've got a great line that kind of describes this. This is later on. This is page 140 of volume 1. And so then you've got the spirit figure who's talking. She's talking to Bode, and she says, no, you can't understand because you're reading the last chapter of something without having read the first chapters. You're a little guy, Bode. Kids always think they're coming into a story at the beginning when usually they're coming in at the end. And I think that that's a really, really interesting statement that you get within this book, that if you find it confusing at times, and at first it is a little disorienting because you are jumping around, and then you realize I have to be paying very close attention to the artwork because the artwork is conveying something that the text is not. But we're kind of coming in at the end of the story, and we're trying to piece it together. We're trying to say, well, why has the family moved here to Lovecraft? Why are they so psychologically damaged and what's gone on as a result of this. But also you see that there's a mythos within this story itself, that the father growing up in this very strange house in Lovecraft, that he himself must have this interesting relationship with this spirit figure, that you think when you're getting volume 1 that you're starting at the beginning of the story, and it's like, no, this is an ancient story, this is going back generations, and it's up to you as the reader to understand that, to be comfortable with being a little disoriented by this, and to not have the arrogance to think that it really begins when we begin with our own reading, that it's ultimately, there's a history projecting far into the past that we're not privy to, at least not at this point in the story, and it's up to us to try to catch up to that. And so that, I think, is really great. Treating the reader within a comic series with respect, treating us as though we can follow a fairly complex narrative, we can follow a fair number of characters, you can jump around in terms of the chronology within the story, you can give us fairly complex themes and concepts, and you can also put fairly complex artwork in there and trust that the reader will be paying attention and will not get lost by this. And so in general, it's a really satisfying read. It will not take long, and if you can get your hands on this, then I would say absolutely go for it if any of that sounds interesting. And I mean, my only the only negative that I can say, and this has absolutely nothing to do with Locke and Key itself, is my issue with comics in general is always accessibility, and it's just the cost themselves of comics. It can be hard to keep up with it. I mean, the first volume is $25, and I mean, that's part of the comics industry. When you're dealing with full color glossy pages, there's huge costs in publishing that, and you're also dealing with two creators. And so both having an artist and having the writer, and of course you also have the artist who's doing the inking, and typically another one doing the colors as well, that there's a lot of hands that go into this. And so I know that the cost of purchasing it is not always easy, but in terms of if you can only spend if you can only spend a limited amount of money on comics and you like horror comics, I would say that this is something that is you should really consider this, because it's a finite series. It doesn't go on and on and on forever, and it's really rewarding, I imagine, on a reread. I've kind of gone through it again since I read it the first time just a couple days ago, and I skimmed through it and catching things that I didn't even catch the first time, that there's a fair bit of depth here which you can really appreciate. All right, thanks so much for watching, and feel free to comment below. Bye.